Okay, this video is going to be on making your own cornhole boards. You know, 4th of July is coming up and the kids are going to want to have something to do. So this is a great project and they'll last a long time. Here's a couple I made here. I ended up making 4 of them, and the reason I made 4 was the plywood cost was almost as expensive to buy a half sheet versus a whole sheet. So I've actually got 2 of these that I gave away, and these are mine. And let's get to it and let's show you a lumber list we've got. I won't bore you with every item here, but these prices are all from Lowe's, and this is enough to make a quantity of 4 cornhole boards. You know, inevitably you're going to make a set and somebody's going to ask you to make a set anyway, so this will work out to your advantage. The other thing I want to point out besides the list is, you know, you're going to have to get some painting supplies too, but I didn't include paint rollers and brushes and putty knives because you may have that stuff already in your arsenal, so I didn't include that, but it may be a little bit more. The other thing I wanted to point out is your 2x4s are going to have to be cut in an order that will allow you not to have a lot of waste. So if you follow this pattern I've got here, this will give you an idea of what you have to get out of each 2x4 and not have to go out and buy a few more boards because you cut them in the wrong sequence. So that's enough about the lumber list. Let's go to the tools that you're going to need. And I won't go through all these either, but the biggies are the impact driver. That's pretty important versus just a regular screw gun. So hopefully you can hook up with a relative or a friend who's got one of those. And the same thing with the compound miter saw. When you go to cut those leg bottoms at a mitered angle, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier and a lot safer to do it with a compound miter saw. So I just wanted to mention that. And you know, we talked about the paint supplies, and you may already have a lot of that stuff in stock. So let's go to the layout here. When you go to make these cornhole boards, I'm going to give you a separate video on jigs that are going to make your life easier. And we'll cover that in that video, but this is just some of the jigs that you're going to make, and we'll cover that in that video. And instead of just measuring every board and cutting every board, they probably won't come out the same. And I like to take a jig and use that as my tape measure once my jigs are all done. So here's the layout. You know, you're going to take those boards that I told you to cut, and you know, they're pretty basic. You know, you got your top and your bottom, and these are going to be screwed into those long sideboards with 3-inch screws, and then you're going to drop your plywood on top, and then you're going to screw it in with those 1 5/8 screws. And before you drop it on top, though, you're going to apply some liquid nails, you know, all the way down the center. And a little trick I'll tell you about, you know, you're obviously going to pre-drill this whole piece of plywood before you go to put it on. All your plywood on all 4 boards are going to be pre-drilled. And before you go to put on your liquid nails, take and put a screw on the left, the right, top, and bottom, only 4 screws, and screw them in maybe 3/4 way and then back them out. And what this is going to do for you is these are going to be like your alignment pins. You know, make sure that you set this board aside with the 4 screws, and make sure the screws are protruding on the bottom of the plywood by about, maybe a 1/4 of an inch, no more, maybe a hair less than that. And then put your liquid nails on, and then gently set your plywood back on the same way you took it off, and start hand turning those screws until you feel them hit those holes, and that's going to align your plywood for you. You know, if you don't do it that way, this liquid nails is going to make the whole thing so greasy, and it's going to move left and right, and you're going to end up with a piece of plywood that isn't aligned with the frame. So try that on for size, that trick, that'll work for you. And the other thing I wanted to talk about here too was the cornhole bags. You know, I'm a traditionalist. I want the old-time cornhole bags that are filled with corn, not plastic material. The only downside to that is don't let the kids leave these out in the rain, because they will get wet and your corn will turn to cornmeal, and you'll end up buying another set for $25. So anyways, that's going to do it for this portion of the video. And now let's continue on over to the video for the jigs. Okay, this portion of the video is about jigs. When you go to make these frames for these cornhole boards, you want them to come out exact. And if you were to measure all the boards every time and then mark them and cut them, you know, chances are they're not going to come out exact. So I like to make jigs. I'll make one board completely done and then use that as a jig, and I can pretty much toss my tape measure away. So let's take the legs, for example. You know, you start out with a 12-inch 2x4, and then you're going to have to use your compass and, you know, set that so you end up with a nice circle on the end, and then take your jigsaw and cut it out. And once you get that done, you drill your 7/16 hole for the leg. Now it's complete, and you can use this now to make the rest of your legs, keeping in mind that there's only 3 different components to this whole cornhole board. You've got legs, you've got the tops and the bottoms, those boards that are 23 and 7/8, and then you've got the sides, which are 45 and 1/8. And you're going to make 8 of everything. 8 of everything is going to allow you to end up with 4 complete cornhole boards. And just an example of how the jig works is now you've got one completely made just the way you want it. Well, now you can drop that onto a raw 12-inch board, and you can trace it out and then go ahead and cut it. And as far as the holes go, now this jig, you want to be a little careful. You want to get everything as straight as you can. Now, if you don't have a drill press and you're doing everything by hand, well, I'll show you a little trick I learned. First of all, when you go to drill that 7/16, you don't want to start with a 7/16 bit. You know, these are your go-to bits for this project. You got the 7/16 bit and you got the 3/16. And what I like to do is start with a smaller hole. And before you do that, you're going to have to get yourself some sort of a prick punch. Now, you know, this is one from Harbor Freight that's spring-loaded, but you could even use a nail if you were desperate, and, you know, and just mark your board, and then drill that first hole with your 3/16 bit. And after you get that, then go ahead and use that 7/16, and that 3/16 pilot hole is going to make this go in straighter. So now once you've drilled your hole, now you've got your template done. But what you want to do is flip it around and mark this side up. And the reason is, you know, especially if you didn't do this with a drill press, that hole that starts out on this side is going to be perfect, but that bit is going to wander a little bit by the time it goes through the board. So what you want to do is you want to flip it over once you're done drilling it and mark it up. And that way, when you go to mark the rest of your boards, you know, you're going to set it on top, and you're going to just drop your hand drill, your electric drill through there with a 7/16, and you're just going to barely touch that board down below, so you end up with a little divot like this. And then you can go ahead and drill it, and no need to do the 3/16 first. You can just go the 7/16 inch bit. But the reason it's going to come out better that way is because
by the time that drill bit goes all the way through, it's coming out the end that we started with, that we marked. And that's going to be perfect. If we didn't flip this before we decided to use it, you would end up with a little divot that, instead of being right in the middle where you want it, could be the left, right, or, not as accurate as you'd like. And, you're going to do the same methodology when you take your 23 7/8 board. You want pilot holes for those 3-inch screws. And there's a lot of reasons. The first reason is your board won't split as much. Second of all, you're going to have your boards go together a lot tighter when you go to have pilot holes. So same thing there. Just what I like to do is I like to, put a 2x4 on there and draw a line, and then go ahead and mark your holes. And in this case, I think we're about 7/8 of an inch. And sorry about that, 7/8 and 2.5, and put them in the center the best you can, and then go ahead and use your 3/16 bit and drill through, and the same thing with the other side. And now you've got your jig for your 23 7/8, and just set that on top of those other 7 boards that you cut, and go ahead and take your electric drill and drop it down in and make your little divot marks and pull it off, and just drill the rest of the way through. And there is no need for any pilot holes on that long 45 1/8 board. So the other thing I wanted to talk about too is, when you go to cut this with a jigsaw, it's pretty tough stuff. You're going to have to make sure that your jigsaw has a nice coarse wood blade. And even then, you're going to want to sand this to get a better effect. If you don't sand it and it's real jagged, it may bind when you're trying to fold it down from underneath the cornhole board. So, most people don't have stationary tools. I've got a stationary drum sander I can use, and that's great if you got one. And by the way, this little rubber piece here, these are really handy. You can use this on a stationary or a handheld belt sander, and this will make your sandpaper last 100 times longer. You just push it on there while it's running, and it'll strip it off and make it nice and clean. So if you don't have stationary, what you need to do is just use a hand belt sander with at least 80 grit. You don't want any finer than that. And if you don't have that, well, you could always go buy a flat sander disc for a edge grinder and use that, and that would probably be the toughest thing to use of all. But anyways, just do your best, and they'll come out. Just be patient. So anyways, that does it for the jig portions. This will make creating your cornhole boards a lot easier. Same thing when you're drilling your pilot holes on top of your plywood. You want to make sure you have pilot holes, and you can look at the chart to see how that's laid out. Just make sure that when you get all done with the pilot holes, you could actually lay that piece of plywood on top of the other 3 pieces of plywood for the other boards, and use that as a jig as well. So jigs will make your life easier, and that'll do it for this portion of the video.
Okay, that'll do it for the jig portion of the video. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about making your circle. Just make sure you measure down 9 inches from the top of your board and 11 15/16 to the side, and that intersecting point will be where you're going to use your compass. It's not quite 12 inches because remember, we got a lot of bang out of our buck on the plywood, so we're a hair short. We're not 24 inches wide, we're 23 7/8. So that's why this is going to be 11 15/16 from the side. And then just use your compass and carefully do your 6-inch circle. When you set your compass, set it 3 inches apart, and then that'll create a 6-inch circle. And when you're done, just use your jigsaw and go super slow and turning it as you're cutting, and don't go past your pencil line. Back up if you even come close, and Just keep going until you got a full circle cut out, and then use some of that 80 grit sandpaper. 100 grit sandpaper is even better, and take and sand that edge so you get a nice little taper on there, and that'll do it for the circle. The other thing I want to talk about is how do you cut these legs off, and well, how you do that is you got to have a nice flat table to set your cornhole board on, okay, and unfold your legs, and then you're going to take some objects and stick it underneath the cornhole board until you've got 12 inches from the top of the cornhole board to the bottom of a yardstick that you're going to set up on the table, just like so. Let me blow this up a little bit for you. So anyway, so now we've stacked some items. I think I used a couple of 4x4s and whatever, and make sure once you've got it stacked, you don't touch this table and don't move it. So now you know you've got it stacked the right height when you're exactly 12 inches from the top of the table to the bottom of this yardstick. Once you're at that, then you're going to draw your lines on your legs. After you draw your lines, you're going to have to unbolt them, bring them over to the compound miter saw, and make sure that you mark the left and the right side so you don't mix the two up, and put them on the outside of the boards, the markings, so they're going to go right back in the way they came out. And now once you cut that line off, now your legs are going to be perfectly regulation, and they are going to sit perfectly on a floor or a yard, whatever. So that's how you go about cutting off your legs the proper way. You don't want to just leave them, square. You want them professionally done at the bottom there. And the only other thing I want to talk about now is, you're going to have to come up with a paint scheme or whatever. All I did with this design here is I took blue tape that was approximately 1.5 inches wide, and I ran it down the white board. Keep in mind, I'm using a white primer in my lumber list there, and I painted the whole thing white. And then after it was dried, after a day, I put my blue tape over the top of the white, and did another piece of tape over here. And then after that, it's pretty simple. I just painted blue in the middle, blue on the sides, and orange on the outsides here. And then once that's all painted and you've double coated it, you just pull your blue tape off. Now, is the edge perfect? No. They say you can buy this green frog tape if you're a perfectionist, and then you'll probably end up with cleaner edges. But keep in mind, it's only a cornhole board. You can also see that I did not use putty because I had so much paint in here. I wasn't worried about it. But if you want to use putty it all up before you go ahead and paint it your white coat, and that's it. I hope you have fun making the cornhole boards, and I hope you have even more fun using them. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my Pompano Brownie channel, and don't forget to hit that bell so you can get a reminder of every new video we put out. And that'll do it for this video.